Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review. And in this video I'm going to review Flowers of Evil by Ulver. Looking back at every single band I've heard of, I cannot say that there is another band that would shift in so many different genres, directions and approaches as much as Ulver, with the exception of David Bowie in the more mainstream scene. The discography of Ulver is so all over the place. Like, they started with their debut with actually one of the most essential and the most important atmospheric black metal albums, fusing nicely elements of folk in it. The second album, on the other hand, was just completely neo-folk music. And then we get to the third one, which was just pure raw black metal, and a really intense and very good album, possibly my favorite from Ulver and definitely their harshest work. And then after that they got into electronic music and like elements of ambient pop. They've also gone into lots of other directions like modern classical music, music for like soundtracks, psychedelic pop, and with their more recent material into synthpop. But what is the great thing about Ulver is that no matter what genre they touch, they would make some quite intriguing and good works and actually manage to just keep their fan base or create new ones, because it is a rare occasion to see bands like Ulver just shift so much from one genre to the next and still doing a great job on that, because for the most part, when you hear about bands just shifting from one genre to the next, it mostly ends up with really negative results. For Ulver though, it's really one of the big exceptions, since most of the albums they have done, even being so different one from the next, they just manage to make really good works in any sort of genre. And it's really nice how they just adapt in anything they touch, in anything they try to experiment. I would say though that this is not that much of the case with their stuff in the previous decade. Their latest works haven't been that much of my cup of tea, and it's obviously not due to the fact that they shifted genres, but I don't think that they necessarily provided something that different or something that unique to those sounds. Take examples with like the Covers album, that was a psychedelic pop album that was a bit decent. We also had an underwhelming collaboration with Sun, which that could have been an amazing album but ended up being a big mess. Like, the one album I remember actually enjoying from the previous decade was the one they had with a chamber orchestra, and it was a very intriguing album with dark modern classical pieces. And we also got the 2017 album The Assassination of Julius Caesar, which is an album where Ulver shifted their sound once again, going into the direction of synthpop. And this album actually got highly praised and lots of people actually loved this album. For me though, it was a very average and a very mediocre direction on synthpop and synthwave music. There was nothing bad to it, but there was also nothing that would strike my attention and something really that memorable. It was a standard approach on this sort of genre with some interesting ideas with the guitars, but for the most part it was an underwhelming album with lackluster instrumentals, a very weak production in some occasions, and I also found the vocals on this album to really not be all that special. The thing with Flowers of Evil though is that it was an album that I was anticipating. I was definitely expecting a lot out of this album, but instead I think we got one of the most underwhelming albums Ulver have ever done. And that's because this album sounds so much like The Assassination of Julius Caesar, the album they did 3 years ago. I think this is the very first time in the entire Ulver catalog where you see an album sound that much identical with another one. Like, taking some of the main albums, I don't recall ever an occasion where one album would sound like the next one. They would just always shift sounds, shift genres. And for this being the one album sounding identical to a work that I didn't enjoy really as much, it was not that much of a good look. But the main issue with this album is not that much of the fact that it sounds identical to The Assassination of Julius Caesar, but it's more of the fact that it doesn't feel developed in any form. Like, this album doesn't really make up for the mistakes that were on the previous album. Instead, Flowers of Evil pretty much carries the exact same formula. The production, I think it sounds weaker than ever. I don't know why this album feels so silent, like there's no punch to this thing. Everything just sounds so overcompressed. Everything just feels like background ambience. I still find the vocals to be weak on this album as well. Like, he tries so much to sound like the singer of Depeche Mode, and he doesn't really achieve that. Instead, I think it makes for one of the weakest parts in this entire album, which was one of the main concerns I had with their previous work. Also, the instrumentals, for the most part, they're like pretty much the same. They're quite identical to their sound. It is a really one-dimensional project. There is not really a development or something to that project, and it's a really short album going for less than 40 minutes. It's only 8 tracks, and it doesn't actually leave me with that much of a content or something to really talk about. Like, listening to some of the teaser tracks, I was not really expecting this album, because taking tracks like Russendall, for example, I thought it was a really weak track for the most part. It really had nothing to its sound that would sound sort of like a development, something really that refreshing, even from like the previous album, not just in standards of synthpop music. I think the track Little Boy is the only one that has some intriguing moments to it. On the other hand, Nostalgia is a long track. I don't think it needs to be like 5 minutes long, and it's actually one of my least favorite moments. Tracks like One Last Dance and 1,000 Cuts, I feel that they have some really long introductions. They don't really need to be that long, and I don't like how silent for the most part these tracks are. The only track other than that that I think has a interesting chorus to it is the track Machine Guns and Peacock Feathers. I think it has a nice groove. It's a bit of a catchy track, but really I have nothing else to say about this album. If you have enjoyed The Assassination of Julius Caesar, I'm pretty sure that you're going to enjoy Flowers of Evil. But if you are a guy like me, who likes the fact that Ulver would just constantly progress with their sound, just shifting from one genre to the next, listening to an album which is not only similar to the genre, but also identical, like really identical to their previous work, that doesn't sound so much like Ulver. This album does not develop in any case. Instead, I would say that it sounds like a weaker version of an already weak album. This is not something that I wanted from Ulver. And while I don't find that there is something bad about this album, there is nothing good either. I just find it to be the epitome of a very average and mediocre and very standard synthpop album that has really nothing to offer, which is really sad coming from a band that would constantly reinvent the wheel. But this is not the case. Flowers of Evil is definitely one of the most underwhelming albums in the entire Ulver discography, if not the most disappointing one. I'm going to give Flowers of Evil a 5- out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.